Okay. So slightly delayed on the official start, but we're ready to go. So we've been rolling through Bava Metzia. We're now into chapter 6. Last chapter was all about interest, or more specifically, not taking interest on loans. Chapter 6 is going to begin the section that deals with worker-employee relationships. There's a few other things that are also going to get tied in, but that's the general theme for this and also part of chapter 7. So just giving you a fair warning. The Torah talks a little bit about the relationship between workers and employees. The Torah is very clear. If you hire someone, you have to pay them on the day. You can't let them, go home without having paid them if that was the agreement. The Mishnah goes into much more detail, although we're not going to deal with that particular topic just yet, about this relationship, because it is one of the most important relationships that are out there. But we have to understand just a little bit about some of the nature of work in the classical world. You had people who were hired for jobs that were hired for the job, right? I want you to build me a wall, right? I'm not going to tell you when to work. I'm not going to tell you what time in the morning to show up, what time in the afternoon to get done, but I'm paying you $100 to build me a wall, and you get it done. And then you had workers who were paid by the day, right? So I need you to be on my field tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock, to help me harvest such and such. And you would pay them for the day. And some people were a little bit of a combination. I'm paying you for the day to handle this task. The wage worker that we are used to, of a standard hourly rate for whether you're working or not, just because you're here in my building, not so much. It's not impossible, but it wasn't the standard form, let alone the idea of a salary worker, where I'm just paying you and you will produce work that I will then reap some of the benefits off of. It wasn't the way people thought of hiring workers. So keep that in mind as we talk about the different categories of workers, and as we talk about the different contracts that are between employer and employee. But it's important to remember that relationship could change very easily. The idea of having tenure or a pension or something with the boss, no, you can get hired by the day, you can get hired by the job, you're not getting hired for life. So things change. And sometimes the advantage goes to the employer, sometimes the advantage goes to the worker, right? If suddenly workers are scarce, all the other bricklayers are gone, so I'm the only bricklayer left in town, then guess what? My prices are going up. And vice versa. A whole cruise ship full of bricklayers just pulled in, the price is now going to go down. So that's something to keep in mind as we go through this halakha. Natan, you look like you had a question, or just a long day?
Yes, very long.
All right.
I can see how socialism would have developed from what you're talking about in order to be more fair to the workers. Over the course of history, I can see how eventually Jews will come to say, hey, we got to make it a lot more fair than that.
Well, you know what? Actually, it's very interesting what you said, because I was thinking about if Judaism is more socialism or more capitalism, and I came to the conclusion after reading what we are studying that it's more. I thought it was more socialist, but I think the opposite now. It's more pro-capitalist, because their protection for the private property is so important that I think that now is the opposite.
Very good.
You're both wrong.
We're both wrong.
Right.
Of course. Either that or we're both right.
No, like many things, Judaism doesn't fit neatly into modern categories. Right, so you're right. Judaism absolutely believes very much in private property. It very much believes that the profit motive is perfectly fine, that the people have the right to negotiate. But it also has massive protections that protect guilds. They protect what would be the equivalent of unions, and many other worker rights.
Social democrats. Okay?
I think the official term is it's a mixed economy.
Yes.
Right, it's a mixed economy.
Best of both worlds.
Well, given who gave us the instructions, we might sort of expect that this works out well. But it only works if people actually know the law and try to follow the law. But a mixed economy is like what God has ordained. Okay. Mishnah 1.
Mishnah 1. If one hired craftsmen and they deceived each other, they have no legally valid complaint against each other, but only cause for complaint.
Okay, so we're going to start off with worst case scenario, which I just love the way the Mishnah does this. All right, so let's say I hire somebody. we're going to keep my bricklayers for the moment. All right, I hire bricklayers to come and I want them to build a wall for me. And let's imagine in scenario 1 that I deceive them, right? I say I'm going to have work for them tomorrow and they show up and I say, no, actually no work. Sorry, I've changed my mind. Or vice versa. I hire some bricklayers, and by hire I mean we agree that they're going to come and work for me. And I say, I need you here tomorrow. And they say, sure, yeah, tomorrow morning, no problem. And tomorrow morning comes along. Mañana. Exactly. Or better, I pick up my cell phone, I say, where are you? And they say, oh no, we found another job. Sorry, we can't do yours. Right? What does the Mishnah say is what happens? Yeah. So what's the result? In either case, where either the person who said I was going to have a job for you backed out, or the person who said I would do work for you backed out.
You can fetch and complain,
right?
But you have no legal lawsuit against each other.
Exactly, because there was no actual work done, or money changing hands, or an official contract that was binding. Tough, right? You can tell everybody that this person backed out. You can
post it on Facebook.
You can post it on Facebook. You can give the Yelp review, whatever you like, but you have no legal recourse for suing them for damages, for breach of contract or anything if you didn't actually make a binding agreement, or work hadn't begun, or money hadn't changed hands. So we're starting off with the idea that unless you've really made an agreement that goes beyond just I'll be there tomorrow, you don't have an agreement to stand on. Make sense?
You better make a contract.
Or be prepared that sometimes things happen, right? And that is part of the opposite of this, which is the guy calls up and says, well, gee, I'm sorry, but my donkey died, right? So I can't bring the bricks to you today. I can't take him to court for being a day late, right? And say, the lazy worker wouldn't show up just as his donkey. You should carry the bricks yourself. No, if you want to complain, go ahead and complain, but no one's going to listen, because the Torah, right, the oral law, does not give you the right to take that person to court. And vice versa. The guy shows up and was hired, or not hired, but had agreed to come and build his wall. And he gets there and the guy says, oh, I'm so sorry, but yesterday my whole business collapsed. I have no money. There's no way I'm going to be able to pay for this wall now. So I'm terribly sorry I wasted your time. Go home. The guy's like, oh, I came all the way out here to build a wall and you're telling me there's no wall to build. Okay, complain, but you can't take me to court. Right? The Torah protects both sides from random things. Now, once you've gone ahead and made an issue of this, we're going to see there are some consequences.
If one hired a donkey driver or a wagon driver to bring litter bearers or pipers for a bride or for the dead, or laborers to take his flax out of the steep.
No, that was they would leave flax soaking, and at a certain point you had to take the flax out, or else it would be ruined.
Or any matter that would be lost if delayed. If it was a place where there were no others who could be hired for the same wage, he may hire others at the original worker's expense, or he may deceive them.
All right, great line here. Okay. So we have to make sure we understand the situation here. Right, so I've hired you to come and fix a hole in my roof, right? And it's getting close to the rainy season. And you say, I'll be there tomorrow. All right, now we haven't actually officially made the contract, no money's changed hands kind of thing. But I am counting on you, and I'm not arranging anyone else to do it because I am counting on you to be there. And you say, you know what? Wasn't worth my time. I'm not coming out to do it. Well, my roof, the rain gets in, it's going to ruin something, right? I got to get it done today, but today the price of workers has gone up twice, right? So yesterday I hired you and you said you'd do it for $5. Today, if I want to get someone else to do it short notice, he's going to charge me $15. What do I do? I pay the $15 and I charge you for the difference. I charge you, the worker, $10. But how? But how? Okay, so look at the
Instead,
math.
again, we're gonna say, oh, I want to charge you for some services, okay, for misunderstanding, but we didn't have any contract. You said that there's no contract.
Correct.
So which legality do you have? Which standard do you have?
Which is the expectation of avoiding loss. Right? I was expecting to avoid loss because of your verbal agreement, your arrangement that you would do the work for me. If you were not able to do it, and you had told me that, I would have found someone else to do it. So you have set me up for damages. Now, if it doesn't matter whether I have the wall built today or the wall built tomorrow, that's not an issue, and I can't penalize you for backing out. But if there is loss because you have not shown up, because I am now left out in the cold, my flax is going to die, the burial will not be done properly, right? Now I am desperate to fix that hold, fix that flax, to take care of the dead. I'm going to now be penalized because you have reneged. You are going to bear that penalty.
Well, but this makes sense actually, as I think about it. If I hired you to carry the bride to the wedding,
right?
Okay, and she's got to go to that wedding, but you know that if you don't show up and I have to hire someone more expensive, I'm going to make you pay. Even if you try to avoid paying, it's going to be a big thing. You're going to do everything in your power to get there on time.
Right, or send a replacement or something.
Right, you won't just walk away.
What's the difference with the first one? It's the same. They mislead, okay, and one of the other, that's it, didn't do it.
But there's no impending
No
damage.
penalty.
No damage.
Right?
Right.
So if it's just build my wall, oh, I can't be bothered to build your wall. All right, well, my wall,
Okay,
it's not going to ruin my life if you don't build my wall today. But if my whole crop of flax gets ruined because you didn't show up when you said you'd be here, and now I've got to hire someone else and I'm desperate, and the price presumably has gone up, then guess what? I'm going to hire someone else at the new price and do it. And you can see by this, the second half of this, of deceiving, what the issue might very well be. Right? So let's imagine I've hired you yesterday for 5 to come and haul my flax out of the trough and get it stop steeping. Imagine the next day, the guy has gone out at the end and he says, yeah, man, I got a job tomorrow to do flax. I'm getting 5. And his friends go, 5? Man, flax hauling is terrible. You should have charged him 15. Flax hauling costs. You know what? You're right. I'm just going to blow the guy off. I'll tell him, you either pay me 15 or I won't do the flax because I've got you over a barrel. Because I know that you now expect that flax to be done tomorrow and you can't delay it. And so now I can up my price at the last minute and I can really tighten that screw on you and get extra money. It becomes extortion because the worker has some power. If the work isn't done when it needs to be done, the employer is going to have a huge loss. And so the employer may, okay, fine, I'll pay you anything. And the Mishnah is saying, you can say that. And then after they've done the work, you can pay them the originally agreed upon price.
Right.
That's what they mean by deceive. So the guy comes to you and says, you know what, I've been thinking about it. I'm not going to show up unless you pay me 15. All right, I'll pay you 15. The guy comes, he does work, you give him 5, and you say, if you want more, go to the court and tell them what happened.
So the Torah gives you a license to lie.
The Torah gives you a license to defend yourself
Yes.
against extortionary business practices, right?
Yes. And it also gives you a license to tell if your wife says to you, does this make me look fat? I
Now
don't know.
that,
Lie and say it makes you look gorgeous.
that's more than the economy. That's life or death.
That's like that's right.
Right.
She'll
So
lie.
you can always lie for life or death.
Yes, there are reasons. Yes, it doesn't say don't ever tell a lie. There are reasons.
Correct. Right. And
Or for this.
so Immanuel Kant was a little wrong with that. But
Yes.
what the Mishnah is saying here is that if they are reneging on this deal and you're going to be forced to hire someone else at the last minute and likely to end up paying them much more, then you can charge them the difference between what you were going to pay them and what you now have to pay someone else. Or you can even tell them you'll pay them the new price, but end up paying them the old price. And when they go to the court to complain about it, you don't have to worry. The law is on your side. Right. So when it says deceive, it doesn't mean that you should knowingly deceive a worker from the beginning, but you can defend yourself against this kind of, immoral practice. Make sense? Right. And it's just, and again, it all goes back to, if you get it clear in the beginning, right? If the worker says, you will pay me whatever the daily rate is on the day we're working, in case the price goes up. The agreement, if that's not the stipulation, and he says 5, then he better be there, to get that flax, paid 5. All right.
We didn't think it would be fair when you first started, but you
Well-
explained it very nicely.
Well, not me, the Mishnah, but and again, it's there's a constant risk of imbalance between the employer and the employee, and at different points in the relationship, one or the other has the upper hand, and that gives them a position to be unscrupulous. And the Mishnah is trying to make sure that both the employer and the employee remain scrupulous, that they don't exploit, whenever they are in that arc of having the upper hand, the other person in the relationship. It should be fair, and fair doesn't mean that everybody is happiest with the outcome, but it means everybody knows that no one cheated and no one was deliberately trying to or succeeding in taking advantage of the other person. Good. Mishnah 2.
Three next.
Huh?
Mishnah
Did
one.
your page skip?
Mishnah.
Oh, that's very weird. Can I get another copy of the handout? That one will work. But there's more right on the other side of the suggestion.
Mishnah 2.
Yeah, I got 2, Mishnah 3.
Wait, you don't have any.
Mishnah 2. No. Mishnah
No, they
3.
don't have any even pages.
Oh,
It goes 1, 3, 5, 7.
oh, you're right.
Mine has it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there are two, so you can read,
You
Well,
and
would
we
you like
can
me to
interrupt
read-
you.
Should I read from yours and then give it back to you?
Or I can read the art scroll that is different.
All right.
translation.
So we'll try oral. Let's try one, and we'll see how we do. Okay. So yeah, this is Torah Shabbat Al Peh. This is the old way of doing it. One person would recite it usually from memory, and then it would be discussed and talked about. Yeah, my brain's not doing that. If one hired craftsman and they retracted, they are at a disadvantage. Right, so what are we talking about here? Here we're talking about hiring someone and they are in the middle of the work. The work has begun. All right, so let's go back to my brickmen. So I've hired my bricklayers. They begin working, and at the middle, they decide, you know what? What's that?
Can't make money.
They can't make money. Whatever it is, right? So in that kind of instance, they are at the disadvantage, right? So if one hired craftsman and they retracted, they are at a disadvantage, right?
What does mean disadvantage?
Okay, so what does it mean in disadvantage?
Yeah.
Right. So if the workers back out of the deal, right? So they're in the middle of the wall. That means the house owner has to hire new workers to finish the job. Well, if the new workers are going to cost more than the old workers were originally going to cost, guess who picks up the difference in the cost?
First one.
The original workers, right? Basically, think of it like someone building a wall for your house, right? They show up, you've agreed, they're going to pay them $500, they're going to build you a wall. In the middle of it, they decide, you know what? I'm not coming back. I'm not going to finish this wall. The owner goes, all right, well, I still need my wall finished. I'm going to hire someone else. The only other person they can find is going to charge $750 to finish the wall, right? Well, guess where the difference in the money is going to come from?
The one that
It's from the guy who backed out, from the guy who reneged.
Now, what coming from someone with a very low income, okay, sources, okay, a very poor,
Right.
poor person, okay. Let's say that I don't have food to eat, okay, and found a job. So okay, I will start with you. Suddenly, someone say I pay you double, and really doesn't have anything.
Right.
And say, you know what? Oh, you retract your disadvantage, so you need to pay the difference with a new one. But the person doesn't have anything. So what could be the punishment that the court will give to the person? They cannot take their cows. Maybe they don't have cows. Okay, so how can they enforce this law with someone in a very low income
Okay, so
situation?
first of all, if the person had finished the job they had originally begun, they would get paid for their work. So they would have food. So they shouldn't be running out on a job just because something looks better. Because at what point in the economic scale is it okay to ditch a job? Right? When you're very poor, when you're very rich, no, you don't ditch a job in the middle of the job.
In theory, yeah.
In theory, right? That's part of being an upstanding person. You finish the job and then you say, I'm done.
Okay.
Right. So especially for jobs where you're hired to do a job, right? If you're a salaried person, it's a little bit different because your job, your work is a little more constant flowing. And so if you need to quit the job, then you follow the customs of, 2 weeks notice or whatever the local custom is for leaving the job. Finishing is not the ideal way to finish. So what is the penalty, however, if you have somebody who is
enforcement?
Well, so what is the enforcement of the penalty for somebody that is unable to make the financial compensation that they owe? By justice, they owe it. And it's not just for you've broken a contract, you broke my leg, so you have to pay for the healing of my leg and you don't have enough money. You burnt down my house because of your negligence and you have to therefore pay for my house and you don't have enough money. In the ancient world, you were sold. Right. You were sold, and the money that was gotten from you would be used to pay your debt, and it would be for a period of years, not permanently, right? You would be sold for 1 year, for 3 months, for 6 years, whatever was necessary to pay off your debt. It's called prison, right? But rather than your prison having no benefit to the person you wronged, your prison would be you go work for someone else, and the person who you've wronged will enjoy the benefit of the money that you have now earned through the sale of the pre-sale of your labor, which was done by the court.
If they sell to you if they sell you as a slave, okay, and you don't work very hard because you know what, I'm a slave, you know what, that's it. Can they punish you physically?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Also to an Israeli. Also to a Jew.
Within a limit, right? So they're not allowed to cause permanent damage or anything like that. No knocking out teeth, no knocking out eyes, that kind of thing. But using corporal punishment to force a pre-bought laborer, what we would call colloquially a slave, but it's not really property, but you own their activity for a certain period of time, so they're not free to come and go. It's a very awkward category because it doesn't really fit the American slavery experience, but it also doesn't fit the American worker experience. It's this weird indentured servant in between thing. They can force you to work in order to get their money back, because they paid money for you to come work for them. So yeah, that was the option. And the taking away of someone's freedom and the forcing of them to work for the benefit of the person they wronged may sound harsh and bad, and the idea that you can punish them if they're not doing what they should. But what do you think our prison system is? Right? You take away their freedom, you force them to do work in prison work systems. The only difference is very often the money that the person earns doesn't go to the person they wronged. Right? Bernie Madoff is not working in the prison, doing telemarketer or stamping license plates and giving that money to all of the organizations that he cheated. It's either going to the state or it's going to himself as a small amount, but a little bit for when he gets out of prison, whenever that may be. Judaism says, well, we don't have prisons. We're not going to set up buildings everywhere to stick people in and then, take away their freedom, force them to work, and no one benefits. We'll just farm them out, right? If someone has broken the law to such an extent that they can't pay the penalty, then they're going to work it off in someone else's house. And these are white-collar crimes. Right? This is not somebody who's a murderer and someone who's dangerous. This is just someone who's breaking deals.
Well, the other thing about this, you keep harping on the fact that they're going to be punished and they're going to get money taken away from them. But what this could also be is a deterrent. If you know that if you stiff this guy and don't show up to build his wall, go someplace else, this stuff will follow you and they'll come after you. And you may say, you know what, I'll just do what I'm supposed to, right, and I'll get the other job another day.
And remember,
it stops you from doing
right, and remember with Shemitah, every 7 years, everybody is freed, all debts are canceled. So there is a way out of being permanently impoverished. It's not for life that you're going to be trapped in this position. So that really does help mitigate what may feel like harshness. Whereas every 7 years in America, they don't empty the prisons. Right? Well, for somebody, for somebody who's sitting in prison, like the Madoffs, he's there for 20, 30 years, or other people who have committed other types of fraud and contract breaches and such.
Non-violent.
What good are they doing to anybody sitting in prison where we have to spend, $40, $50, $60,000 a year to keep them in prison, and they benefit no one? It really makes very little sense to do it that way. And what punishment is it? Okay, they've lost their freedom. They can't go, flying off to the Caribbean. But are they really paying back their debt to society by sitting in a cell somewhere? It's not as complicated. We take our justice system very much for granted, and we sometimes forget that sometimes it's not a great system, and it's not also very just. So looking at an alternative model doesn't mean we should necessarily quickly re-implement this. Because culturally that would be very problematic, but using it as at least a compare and contrast of what we could do to modify our own legal system to avoid some of its problems is still a very helpful reflection. All right, if the householder, that is to say the employer, is the one who retracts, then he is at a disadvantage. Right, so if he's the one who decides to cancel the project at the middle of the thing, and the price of workers has gone up, or something like that, well, then he doesn't want these workers. He wants to hire someone else. He's on the hook for hiring the original workers, and he's on the hook for paying the people who did the work up to the point that they did. Right, so I have to pay you for the work you did, and I have to go pay some new people, even if they're more expensive. And I can't force them to work for me for what you had agreed to pay, because I'm the one who broke the contract. I'm the one at a disadvantage. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Part 3 is basically a summary, right? Yeah. Whoever changes, or not, that's just not a summary, it's a parallel situation. The summary is part 4. 3 is whoever changes the conditions of the contract, they are at a disadvantage. Right? So if I hire you to build a wall, and you get there and I say, oh, actually I want the wall to be 500 feet, not 100 feet, or I want the wall to be only 10 feet instead of 100 feet, if I'm changing the contract, I'm the one who's at a disadvantage in terms of any renegotiations or hiring different workers or anything else. Vice versa, if the worker shows up and they decide to do the wall and I asked for brick and they do it from stone, or they give a wooden fence, they're responsible for fulfilling the contract correctly because they changed the terms by the way they fulfilled it. Make sense? And then the summary that the Mishnah gives us, and anyone who retracts is at a disadvantage. Just the person who changes what was agreed, they are the person who's going to suffer the most in this renegotiation. So that's the upshot of all of this. And again, it's talking about making sure that in the balance between employer and employee, no matter who thinks they have the upper hand, they don't. If the worker thinks, I'm going to quit now and demand a higher price, too bad. You're the one who quit. The employer is at an advantage. On the other hand, if the employer says, I'm going to fire him now in the middle of all of this and hire someone cheaper, tough. You're still going to be making your obligations to the first worker, right? Because the agreement is the agreement, and once it's begun, everybody is bound by it, and whoever changes it, they're the ones in trouble. Right? Neither side should have the advantage that could abuse the other one. Make sense? Okay. Mishnah 3, which you all have copies of. All right, it's much easier to have someone else read and me to do commentary on it.
If one hires a donkey to drive it through hill country, and he drove it through a valley, or to drive it through the valley and he drove it through the hill country, even though the distance of each was 10 miles, if the donkey died, the hirer is liable. Okay.
Great scenario. Right, I'm gonna rent a donkey. That's, I just love the idea of having rent a donkey.
Yeah.
All right, I want a donkey for the day. And when I rent the donkey, I have to tell the person what I'm doing with the donkey, because what I do with the donkey will change what the renter feels he wants to charge or which donkey he wants to give me, right? It'd be like the equivalent if you go to a rent-a-car place, like take, for example, U-Haul, and they say, okay, but there's a mileage limit. right? You can rent this truck, but if you go over 500 miles, then there's additional charges and fees or whatever. Or sometimes they just say you can't go over a certain amount of distance. That's because they have limits on what they want to do. So too here. You've hired a donkey to go up into the mountains, right? I gave you my mountain donkey. If you take him into the valley and he dies, well, that's your fault because I gave you my mountain donkey. And if I gave you my valley donkey because you said you were going to the valley and you take him up into the mountains and he dies, well, that's your fault to the renter because you took my donkey to the wrong spot, right? Even if the distance is the same, right? It does make sense, right? It does make sense. Now we're going to see there are some exceptions to this general rule where hopefully you'll also see it makes sense. But the basic principle is whatever I hired it for, that's what I get to use it for. And if I do something that it wasn't designed for, I'm responsible for getting the replacement when it dies. Rather than I can't go back to you and say, you know, I rented that donkey of yours, and I know I said I was going to the mountains, but I went to the valleys. You know, that thing died. You know, I could have really been hurt when that donkey died. What were you doing with my donkey in the valley? I gave you my mountain donkey. No, you owe me a new donkey. Not you're complaining. Right? It's not the customer's always right, and it's not caveat emptor. You know, there's a balance here. However,
if a man hired a donkey and it went blind or was conscripted into the king's service.
All right, we have to make sure we understand that second part. Blind, I think you all understand. Conscripted into the king's service. In addition to all of the various taxes that people had to face under royal rule, the royal representatives, you know, whether they were the local tax collector or a local sheriff or a general or whatever, might decide he needs extra donkeys for some project today. And so they go through the street and they say, these donkeys come with me. And you're stuck. Your donkey is being taken away to be used for this project. Right? So if
this would be the donkey you hired is no longer available.
Exactly. I hired the donkey. I walk out into the street with my hired donkey and I'm getting ready to do whatever I do with my rented donkey. And all of a sudden the king's guy comes by and says, we need donkeys. That one looks good. And takes the donkey I just hired away from me. Or I walk out and, you know, I'm doing some work with the donkey and all of a sudden I realize the donkey's blind. Just now. It wasn't blind when I got him, but he's going blind now. I go back to the donkey renter and I say, hey, the king took my donkey, or hey, that donkey has just gone blind. What happens?
The owner may say to the hirer, here is yours for you, and he need not replace the donkey.
Right, so that in brackets, that's not in the Mishnah, that's the implication, right? Which is, hey, the donkey I rented you is still around, right? And not my fault you can't use it. Right? I rented you a perfectly decent donkey, and if the king came and took it, that's not the donkey's over there. Look, you can see him. You can see the king still using the donkey. And you know what?
A little harsh.
Well, it's a little harsh, but it's also very realistic, which is it's not the renter's fault if something random happens that is totally unexpected and takes the donkey away, especially because, especially because the donkey does still kind of exist, right? I mean, the donkey is still going to come back. Eventually, the king's men would return the donkeys they had borrowed. And then you can do whatever you wanted with the donkey.
So you're saying it's not the owner's responsibility.
Right. Or it's blind. Okay, fine. But, you know, you can still use a blind donkey for carrying stuff. Yeah, right. So it may not be what you, right. It's just guided. It may not be what you wanted. And you may have to wait or, you know, whatever might be an issue here. But you still have as much access to the donkey as I gave you. If something else has happened since then, that's not the renter's fault, right? You got your donkey. What do you want from me?
No, it's not the renter. It's not the owner's fault.
Sorry, the renter. I mean the renter, as in the owner of the donkey.
The owner of the donkey.
The renter, not the rentee. Right?
Oh no, make it owner and hirer.
Okay, yeah, okay. The owner and the hirer.
Yeah,
it's not the owner's fault. The hirer got the donkey, and the whole owner doesn't have it, right? He's not like he didn't take the donkey back. So why should the owner be responsible for what happened to the donkey while you were there, right? Think, for example, let's do a little modern experiment. You have rented a car, and you rent the car, and for whatever reason, not because you did anything wrong, but for whatever reason, somebody comes and tows your car away, the rented car. Are you going to go back to Avis and say, hi, I rented a car from you and somebody came and towed it away.
So I'm not
I'm not paying you for that car. Give me another car. What are you talking about? It's go get the car back if you want to get the car back. But it's not our fault that someone towed your car, right? Why should we lose because while in your possession something weird happened to the car? Make sense?
Yeah, but I have an issue with this.
Is that because you usually rent or because you usually loan? I find that depending upon where you normally sit.
Yeah.
No,
That's
because
right.
what I try to see it from the legalistic point of view, what we learn until now, okay? But all the transactions are kosher if they pass, okay? They happen whatever you are buying, you are paying,
Right.
okay? In this case, the guy rent and donkey and pay for the donkey, okay?
Right.
Fine. But if they cannot use the donkey because the king take it, why does he need to pay for it for the day that he's renting if he cannot use it?
Right.
So no one can need to suffer. So the owner needs to return the money for the specific days that the rental person cannot use, and because the rental person it's not fair that they will pay. So if Rabbi Natan will be there, that will be my rule because. From that point of view, for me, it's like, okay, you know what? It's true that it's not the owner responsibility. However, it's neither the renter. So why the renter need to pay for that specific days?
Right. So, first of all, the fact that the donkey still exists and that is likely to come back into use eventually, just like the towed car, is an important part, as we're going to see from the next part of the Mishnah. Secondly, I chose to rent you this donkey. I could have rented it to someone else. And then maybe it wouldn't have gone blind, or maybe the king wouldn't have taken it. So why shouldn't I be compensated for the loss of my donkey? If I kept the donkey at home, I'd still have a donkey.
You know, that reminded me and joke, okay, there's a long joke, but I will do the second part. That, for example, when come a couple of old Jews to the hotel, okay, and the owner of the hotel say, well, and the day of their checking out, okay, you owe me $1,000. Why? Well, we have this spa for your use, but I didn't use. Doesn't matter. It's there.
Right.
You need to pay. Was there? Exists. Okay. So the Jew say, you know what? You owe me $5,000. Why? Because okay, you sleep with my wife. I didn't sleep with your wife. That's your problem.
She was there.
Okay. You didn't use it. Your problem. It's not the same situation. No? You know, doesn't make sense. It's illogical. Oh, it's there. Okay.
But wait. Assuming, just to go back to your hotel example, because it's actually really good, not the second part, but the main question is a good one. Assuming that the person knew the price of the hotel when he signed up and knew that the price was so high because of the spa, then the hotel owner had made a decision that people wanted to come to his hotel for that spa. The person who took that room was presumably taking the space of someone who would have paid $1,000 because of the spa. So assuming it's all in front and all clear, then I think absolutely the guy has to pay for the spa even though he didn't use it.
But the husband used the same logic as the rabbis here.
Yeah.
My wife is there. You can see it. You didn't use it. It's your problem.
Except
The same
you
logic.
are prohibited from sleeping with someone else's wife.
No, but it was like a prostitute. Okay, she's like a prostitute.
And this
she
is
was there. You didn't use this.
right, but in Mishnah, this is legal.
No, but
Right, but there was no
kind
agreement.
of logic, like.
But there's a big difference. There was no agreement. Let's take a little change here, just for the sake of the argument. Let's say instead the guy said, not his wife, but said, well, I'm a lawyer, and my hourly rate is $100 an hour, right? And you didn't use my legal services, but I was here. So the place where that falls down, right? It's a little nicer, yeah. I don't have to worry about it being asur, being prohibited.
It's online in YouTube, yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
But the place where I hope that it gets highlighted is when he agreed to rent the hotel room, he made an agreement. The owner never made an agreement to use his legal services. So there was no obligation for the owner to pay for legal services he didn't use, but there was an obligation from the moment he signed in and gave him his credit card or whatever it was. There was an obligation to pay the rate for the hotel. Now, if the owner didn't tell him what the hotel rate was until the end, then that was wrong.
What about the spice extra?
And if the spa wasn't extra price, then that has to be part of the original agreement as well, right? If he says the hotel room is $50, but the spa is $1,000, and you have to also sign up for the spa if you want to stay in the hotel, then the guy should have said, whoa, I'm not staying here. But if he signed up and said, well, I just won't use the spa, no, if the agreement was you will pay whether you use or not, he has nothing to complain about at the end. He shouldn't have stayed in that hotel. But it all comes down to what was agreed. And that's why the second half of the joke doesn't work legally. It's funny, but it doesn't work legally because there was no agreement to use his services that he could then turn around and say, well, hey, just because you didn't use them doesn't mean you don't have to pay. You know, I go to hotels all the time. They have swimming pools. When I get to the checkout desk, I don't say, well, how much of this bill is because of the pool? Because I didn't use the pool. Or I didn't watch your TV or...
Okay, but there's a difference because you use or not by your free will. This person, the rented person, okay, he doesn't have any free will to say to the king, you know what, don't take my donkey.
Correct.
So that's different, okay, that's different
right,
in that case.
But it's not
free will, so they force him to give the donkey.
But it isn't the owner's will that's taking it away from him. That's the important part here.
Why did he need to pay?
Because the donkey was in his use. Yeah. Just because he couldn't use it doesn't mean it wasn't in his use.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's put that way. I disagree with the opinion.
Hold on a second. One more example. Go back to car rentals, right? All right. So I'm visiting Chicago.
No one has my position, by the way.
There are places where you're going to see the renter is off the hook. But we're not there yet. The hirer does get off the hook sometimes. And we're going to get there in just a second as soon as I finish my story. So I'm in Chicago. And I don't have a car in Chicago. So I go and I rent a car at the airport. I drive out of the airport. I go to my hotel. And there's a snowstorm. And the roads are closed for 3 days. The car sits in the hotel garage, right, for 3 days. I can't drive and see the lake. I can't go anywhere in this car. It's just sitting there. So I finish, the snowstorm clears. I finish my vacation in Chicago. I drive the car back to the rental place. And I say, well, for 3 days, this car was stuck because of the snow. So I shouldn't have to pay for those 3 days.
No.
What's the rental company going to say to you?
No.
You had the car.
Yeah.
The car, what was the term? The car is before you.
Right.
Right? Sit and listen to the radio, and enjoy the company of the blind donkey, whatever it might be. It wasn't with us, and we didn't stop you.
It's not their fault.
It's not their fault.
Yeah.
However, part B.
But if the donkey died or was broken, he must give him a new donkey.
Now, notice he doesn't give him a refund, right? But if the donkey just drops dead and now is totally useless, I'm not going to make you pay for the continued use of a non-useful donkey. Similarly, if the donkey has a broken leg and can't do anything, I'm not going to make you pay for that donkey. I will give you another donkey that you can use instead, right? So I'll give you the replacement donkey. So if I rent a car and I pull out of the lot and the car gets a flat tire, they don't come out to me and say, hey, too bad. They give me a different car or fix the tire or whatever it might be. Make sense? Right. Okay. If
one hires a donkey to drive it through hill country and he drove it through a valley, if it slipped, he is not liable. But if it overheated, he is liable.
Right. So remember, the very first part we were talking about dying donkeys. Now we're talking about injured donkeys. Right. So if you drive it through the valley and it doesn't die, you're okay. Right. You're not liable. But if you back up. If you hire the donkey to drive through the hill country and instead you go through the valley and it slips, you're not liable. Why? Well, you got to think about your all-terrain vehicle donkeys here, right? The four-hoof drive. You're not getting where I'm going with this? Right. Mountain donkeys have better footing, which means if I take it from the difficult situation and go to an easy situation and it gets hurt because of its slipping, it wasn't going to be good in the mountains either, right? So if I take a four-wheel drive and it gets a flat when I'm driving it on the freeway, then I can say, give me another car, right? Give me another wheel. Because if it couldn't survive the freeway, what was it going to do if I was driving out in the forest? Right? And then the donkey should have been able to avoid slipping if it was a mountain donkey. So I went from a harder task to an easier task. If it got injured while doing the easier task, then it's not my fault and I don't have to give you a new donkey because I ruined it. If it dies, then I do. That was what we learned way back in the first Mishnah, right? Or the first part of the Mishnah, what we call the Resha. All right. However, if it overheats, then it is liable. The idea being down in the valley, it gets warmer. And if I gave you my mountain donkey, then I was assuming you were going to take it up to the cooler mountain air. And if you take it into the hot air, well, it's not a hot air donkey, right? So that means you went from an easier to a harder task. Now you are in trouble. Does that make sense? All right, so the rabbis are trying to say you need to assess what was easy for what you rented, and did you do something harder than it, as easy with it, or easier than it? And if you went the same level of difficulty or less difficulty, you're not responsible because you purchased something or you rented something that was good enough for that level. But if you made it do something harder, now you're in trouble because you did not rent it to do something harder than what you said. Make sense? Okay. And then
That's what the second point is. If
Yeah.
one hires a donkey to drive it through a valley and he drove it through hill country, if it slipped, he is liable.
because this is not a mountain donkey.
That's right. But if it overheated, he is not liable.
If it can't stand the cool mountain air, what was it going to do if I actually took it to the valley? Right? That thing would have been dead in the first minute.
Well, you hired it to drive it through the valley, so this is a valley donkey.
Right. But if I
if
take
he
it,
overheats, you're not liable because this was supposed to be what he could do.
exactly. If it's supposed to be strong versus the heat of the valley. So if I take it to the mountains and it overheats, I'm not responsible for it.
No, the opposite way. Oh, if he takes it up in the hill.
Right. Drove it through the hill country. If I take a valley donkey
and
take it to the hills, and it gets hot, then I'm not responsible. Even though I took it somewhere I wasn't originally saying I was going to take it, because I took it somewhere where it should have been able to handle it just fine, at least with regards to heating, and it didn't. That's not my fault, the renter. That's sorry, man. You just had a bad donkey there that's not good for overheating.
Except if
Blew a gasket.
Right. Except if he hired it to drive through a valley and instead he took it up in the hills and it overheated because of the climb up, then he is liable.
Right. Because you know what? That kind of extra exertion, that wasn't in the original bargain.
It's a valley donkey.
Keep it level. Okay. 4 is very similar. I think we can plow through it.
Oh.
Sorry, it's a pun, as you'll see. Mishnah 4. If one hired a cow to plow in the hill country and he plowed in the valley, if the plowshare was broken, he is exempt. All right, so I got a cow and I got the plow with it and I want to rent it to go do my plowing for my field. And I told you I was going to go plow up in the hills, but instead I plow in the valley. If my plow breaks, the blade from the plow, I'm not responsible for that break. Why? Because it's supposed to be stronger. If I told you I'm plowing the mountains, that's where all the rocks are. And so if it breaks in the soft valley dirt, then it would have definitely broken in the mountain dirt. So again, it's the same idea. If you're using it for its stated purpose or a lighter purpose, you're off the hook. But if you're using it for something more difficult than a stated purpose, now you're responsible. It's like you rent your little Ford Mustang from the rental car company and you decide to go off-roading. You are in trouble, right? But you rent your four-wheel drive and you drive it on the freeway. If something happens, you're fine. Because if it can handle the off-roading, it should certainly be able to handle the freeway. Maybe. The next part, if this is sort of in brackets, if one hired a cow to plow in the valley and he plowed in the hill country, if the plowshare was broken, he is liable. Right? So this is the opposite case. I got the valley plow, but I take it up with the heavy rocks and it breaks. My bad. I'm the stupid one. Part 2, if one hired the cow, to thresh beans and he threshed grain, parentheses, and the cow slipped and was injured, he is exempt. Right? This is because grain is less slippery than beans. Right? So if it was going to slip on grains, it certainly would have slipped on the beans. and that would have been the same result. On the other hand, if one hired it to thresh grain and he threshed beans, parentheses, and the cow slipped and was injured, he is liable. Because again, beans are more slippery than grain. You're putting the thing to not to its original intended purpose, and therefore, if it fails, you're responsible for it. Logical? Right, Rabbi Natan, you're not going to argue?
No, in that case, no.
This case, it makes sense. This case,
Yeah,
it makes
the other one
still.
disagree, and I want to know if maybe there's any rabbi that agree with him, customer point of view.
Well, we'd have to look in the Gemara. So,
Yes.
but if there was, he didn't make it into the main. So now I'm sure that we can find many exceptions with how to slice what counts as being taken, what counts as
Yeah,
being
because
blind.
For me, the
but-
issue is between free will, okay, or not, okay. Like if you have a control of something,
Mhm.
that's what I understand. But if you were forced to do something else, okay, and not by the weather, but that you,
Mhm.
the king. I can understand. By the way, your example of the rental car in the snow,
snow, right.
it was a good one. I need to admit it. Okay, it was
Okay.
a good one. But still, okay, it's the king. Look, it's not the nature. Okay, no, that's happened.
Oh, no, hold on. I got to stop you there. According to the way Judaism related to kings, the king is a force of nature, right? The way kings move and what kings do, you have no control over that, and we do not.
Yeah.
We act like it's a hurricane or an earthquake. If the troops come through and wipe something out, that was the king's army. That wasn't a normal circumstance. So we have a different set of standards now because we have ways of holding our leaders accountable, which forced them to behave in different ways than the ancient kings. But for the ancient world, kings, they weren't like Queen Elizabeth in England. They were forces of nature. So yeah, that may be one of the differences between how you're viewing this and how they viewed it. The king just happens, and when that happens, it's like a lightning bolt. It's just that's what's happening. All right, I think I can just get us through Mishnah 5 because it's very similar on the same theme, and so I'd like to wrap it if we could.
If one hired a donkey to carry wheat, and he used it to carry the same weight of barley, he is liable if the donkey was injured.
All right, this is where you go, what?
Yeah.
Wait a minute,
Right.
100 pounds of wheat, 100 pounds of barley,
It's more heavy.
100
100
pounds,
pounds.
same weight. Right, that's like the old joke when you were.
Pound of feathers are
No,
pound of iron.
because doesn't have anything here. The translation is different.
Yes, exactly. They didn't put. We have the brackets, right, of the weight, but it's the same. It's the old joke. I don't know if you were kids, where they say, "Would you rather be hit with 100 pounds of bricks or 100 pounds of feathers?" 100 pounds is 100 pounds, right? So you still should pick feathers because of how they distribute the weight. But I mean, it's still 100 pounds is 100
We say,
pounds.
which weighs more, 5 pounds of iron or 5 pounds of feather?
Right.
Feathers. Which weighs more?
We were more violent school, so. But it's 5 pounds is 5 pounds, but it's about bulk. About bulk.
Wow.
It's
Bulk.
bigger.
How much
Bigger.
space does it take up, right? So imagine imagine I give you 20 pounds to carry, and it's this big, like a bowling ball, right? That's not so bad. But imagine I give you 20 pounds to carry, and it's a 30-foot pole, right? It's like it's just so awkward because of being so big. The barley took up more space for the same amount of weight. So for the donkey, that means it's going to be pulling and straining because of the leverage of the larger bulk than it would if it was a smaller wheat load. Make sense? And again, it's all about the agreement. If you hire for wheat, don't carry the barley. Doesn't mean you can't hire a donkey for barley, but you have to make clear what you're using it for when you hire, because the person who's loaning it to you or renting it to you, they got to know.
Right, that's what you're saying. If he hired it to carry grain and he used it to carry the same weight of chopped straw, he is liable since the greater bulk is more difficult to carry.
Right. So the second part of this first part of the Mishnah makes it a little clearer that it's all about the bulk. Right. Straw is bulkier than grain. Barley is bulkier than wheat. So not just the weight, but also how it carries makes a big difference if you're a donkey driver. That's the way you have to load your donkey. Part 2?
Part 2 seems to be a contradiction to part 1, because if he carried it to If he hired it to carry a letech of wheat and it carried a letech of barley, he is not liable.
Letech is the equivalent of cubic,
Volume?
exactly, cubic
Ah.
volume, right? So if you hire it to carry a letech, let's say
A yard.
5 cubic,
A yard of wheat,
uh,
you carry a yard of barley.
or let's say
Weights.
liters, that's a nice volume measure,
Oh.
right? Or ounces. No, ounces in English is both liquid and weight.
You're
Yeah,
talking about
yeah, liters. Liters is a volume measurement. Right, liters is a volume measure. So you hire it to carry 500 liters of wheat, and you decide instead to fill up the same amount of bulk with 500 liters of barley, you're okay.
Because it's lighter.
Because even if it's it's not going to be bulkier, it's going to be the same amount exactly. However,
But if he increased the weight, he is liable.
right? So, but if I use the same volume, but it's also heavier, now we are in a problem, right? So the first part of that assumes that the same volume will be the same or less weight. But if we do the same volume but more weight, then now we have contradicted the terms of the original agreement. Make sense? Okay, but the question then becomes, what counts as more?
What if he increased the weight,
Right.
he's liable. What increase in weight renders him liable?
So great Jewish question. This is the way the Mishnah and the Gemara are all built, which is, you just told me a categorical statement. If you increase the weight, you are liable. And the hand goes up at the back and says, what do you mean increase?
How much?
Right?
Yeah,
Because
what's an
is it
increase?
one extra little kernel, little corn, grain, or
And probably they will come with a fraction.
it's always a percentage, right? It's always a ratio of percentage.
1/60. Okay, done.
Okay,
Yeah, they
so
did that complicated.
well, yeah, they did actually, but let's go ahead and see the
Rambam
example.
says in the name of Rabbi Meir, 1 seah for a camel and 3 kabin for a donkey.
And again, the footnotes help give us a little grounding for this. So a seah per camel is about 1/15 of a letech.
Okay.
So we're back there, right? So it's about a 1/15 margin of extra weight. If you hired it for a letech, you can carry a letech plus 1/15 of weight, and you're still okay. Go over that, and now you've put more weight on it than you hired it for. And for a donkey, it is 3 kabim, which is the equivalent of half of a letech. So that would be 1/30th. Right, so it's a smaller margin of error because donkeys carry less than camels do. Make sense? Okay.
So letach is one volume.
It's a measurement of volume. Yes.